Good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nick from Business Review, and I will be hosting today. It is our pleasure to have with us PRISYM ID, who will be presenting their webinar titled, Why a Global Labeling System is Becoming Critical for Medical Device Manufacturers. And today's guest speakers are Richard Adams, CEO of PRISYM ID, Simon Jones, Vice President of Global Products at PRISYM ID. Now, I'd obviously like to welcome everyone to our platform, which is On24, and you'll notice that the entire platform is browser-based. So if you encounter any problems for any reason, please just click on the link that you received in the email or refresh your page. Now, in order to ask any questions at all, you can send them in via the questions widgets, which should be in the top right-hand side of your screen. All you need to do is type the question in and click submit. And also, if you do need any help at all, please just use the yellow help widget alongside the bottom of your screen, and feel free to move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you. But for now, please allow me to welcome Richard.
Nick, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to have you along with us. Thank you for joining. Simon and I look forward to sharing with you our thoughts on this really fascinating subject of global labeling solutions in med device. And we thought we'd tackle it in 3 sections to get started. The first one is to really consider some of the drivers which are making companies adopt global labeling solutions, consider how they evolve from perhaps legacy systems, more disparate systems, to a new solution. So we'll spend some time looking at those drivers, many external, some internal, for a period. We'll then move on to capabilities, and that means that we'll describe some of the core technology, core functionality that our experience in working with this industry for many, many years has taught us is vital to being able to deploy a solution of this nature, the componentry which makes up what's required. And then we'll finish really trying to debunk a few myths, I think, which is to say, investigate and consider some of the new technologies, services, implementation approaches, which mean that the ability to deploy solutions of this type today, I think is coming of age. It's easier, it's going to be simpler, it's going to be more cost effective going forward. And it's important for us, I think, to offer some practical thinking around that section. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about some of these drivers. Externally, and for sure, what's very important and for consideration of both the C-suite, I suppose, in your organizations and elsewhere, is that the global medical device market is growing fast. We expect that in 8-9 years' time, at the end of the decade, it's probably 50% bigger than it is today, at about $800 billion, according to certain research. And that means that companies are growing their presence in existing markets, but they're also exploring new geographies and, of course, massively adopting new technologies, new capabilities to deliver solutions for patients. So whichever way you look at this, it's going to be a bigger industry, it's going to be a more diverse industry, it's going to be a more technologically centric industry, and it's going to be more geographically widespread. And certainly what that means is that there's a very, very important emphasis on a highly competent global supply chain that is going to enable manufacturers to both create product and then further distribute it. And business systems like ERP solutions, product lifecycle management solutions, are now being deployed globally. They have been for some years, but there's more adoption yet of those solutions being deployed globally. And that's to support the challenges of being able to operate in that fashion. Disappointingly, I think global labeling systems are lagging behind somewhat. And Simon and I will explain some of the reasons for that later and our views. But the challenge is that by lagging behind, companies are missing out on all the benefits of the consistency and the business efficiency, the optimization of operational overhead and so forth, that aligning labeling solutions and labeling software solutions alongside other business systems on a global basis can deliver. And the truth is, of course, that we know that products, and certainly their packaging and labeling, must be localized for local markets. They must meet the needs, the information needs, the language needs, and so forth of local markets. But to do so in a disparate fashion and to do so in a fragmented fashion not only means that it exacerbates risk in the sense that disparate systems typically carry individual sets of operating procedures and so forth, which doesn't really lend itself to optimizing risk management. But also, I think it means organizations miss out on opportunities. So they might miss out on up-to-date manufacturing opportunities like just-in-time capabilities. They might miss out on the flexibility that they need to be able to bring lines on, take them down, run long lines of product output, shorter lines, and so forth. So the labeling system's got to be able to run parallel and run in step with the broader supply chain capability in order for this to work. And I think if we globalize other supply chain solutions, then surely labeling needs to keep up. Of course, we wouldn't get very far in a medical device labeling discussion without majoring on regulation. And naturally, regulations really in place for one key reason, and that is to preserve standards which ultimately preserve safety for patients and HCPs and so on using products. At the last count, I think there were more than 130 odd different regulatory bodies around the world with specific rules and specific standards required to ensure that medical device products marketed, sold, and used in those countries upheld the right levels of compliance. And that in itself is a challenge to maintain a position of adhering to regulation when the content and the regulatory symbology and the regulatory terms and language and so forth it can be so complex and difficult to navigate in order to ensure that the right content is on the right product label in the right place. Every product that is sold needs to be labeled with the correct regulatory and other data. We've seen in recent years, of course, the adoption of unique device identifier, UDI, first in the United States and then more extensively adopted by the EU MDR standard. We also see other factors that regulators have to get to grips with and then manufacturers have to respond to. So technology in itself. So if we think of software and we think of software versions inside medical devices, they need to be recorded and that content needs to find its place on the label or the right communications mechanism. So it's a hard ask, this, to be able to maintain adherence to the standards, to track the regulatory change. And I think if getting it right the first time wasn't hard enough or isn't hard enough, it's the management of change which is extremely difficult to live up to without the right tools in place.
Yeah, I'd add to that. You mentioned UDI and the fact that EU MDR are built on UDI principles. We can see that regulators are trying to do a level of harmonisation. They are looking to leverage good practice from other regulators. But of course, it still means that for each market, often each country, the regulators may be at different stages of adopting new regulations. And that, as you say, that adds to the supply chain complexity of making sure that from a centralised perspective, you've got visibility of how your change control is operating in meeting those changes of regulations in different regions. So it's a challenging area.
No, absolutely. And I think it's it's a good business maxim that predictability and consistency, has a positive effect on risk management. If we think about another external factor, there's absolutely no doubt that the complexities of what happens when mergers and acquisition activity is vibrant, really pose challenges to organizations. And this industry, like many others, but perhaps even more so than some, is very active from an M&A perspective. I think if you look back over the last 3 years or so, some sources would report roughly 400 transactions in a year, and I dare say they're not picking them all up. And clearly, these M&A activities occur for lots of different strategic business reasons. It might be therapeutic area expansion, it might be portfolio extension within a therapeutic area, it could be technology acquisition, as well as broadening geographic footprint. But what it does is adds extra operational complexity, and simply because systems that in acquired businesses and business units obviously don't usually match those that are already in place. And so it sort of exacerbates that tension of attempting to standardize, but then being hit from one side by something new, which is legacy, inconsistent, fragmented, and not easily integratable at the beginning. And typically what tends to happen in M&A activities, IT integration is a poor relation. Lots of other integration activities simply go ahead of it. So with a global labeling solution in place, let's call it the mothership in this type of situation, especially if it's deployed using modern cloud architectures, there's a real great opportunity to facilitate accelerated integration, onboarding of acquired businesses, acquired business units, disparate business units within the existing organization, obviously, is very similar, in order to obtain the benefits of that standardization. And in so doing, I think, it's very likely that even in an M&A context, the investment case is probably optimized through doing that. So that's another thing that we see clients and people we talk to in the industry wanting to think about GLS in this context, because they might be part of very acquisitive organizations.
Yeah.
There are a couple of other areas I thought we'd just talk about, which are slightly different, which are probably newer areas, and very much in response to different methods of healthcare consumption and different technologies. And one of those is the consumerization of medical device. And I was minded when I was thinking about this of obviously recent times with COVID-19 and the ability or the interest that many people had in buying pulse oximeters for oxygen measurement. These things you can buy on Amazon. And of course, as you go as a consumer to look for one, how do you know which is a good one, which is the best one? There may be reviews, but they're typically not HCP reviews. And how do you do that? And the reality is that technologies of that type, and obviously other entrance into the med device market from more technology backgrounds as opposed to more medical backgrounds, is driving a growth in consumer-facing medical device. And another reason for this happening is growth in home care or home-administered care, so that whilst this may not be the type of thing you buy on Amazon, it still may be the case that people are administering care with certain medical devices in the home. There's a different challenge here for labeling, and there's a different challenge for information, because this is a move beyond just technical information, which may have been directed at a healthcare professional. And now, with a patient, a consumer as a target, branding and experience becomes perhaps more important. And that means that the type of labeling capabilities and so on go beyond to branding, to ensuring that perhaps you might want to launch in multiple countries at the same time, and that consistency is a prime requisite. So to our mind, that's a driver, and as we talk with different players in the industry, these conversations come up, and it speaks, later on in this discussion, to things like artwork management and so forth. The last item here is around the emerging potential of personalized medical devices. And clearly what this means, and it's the same in pharmaceuticals with gene therapy and cell therapy and so forth, is that it's going to move the data that's required to be utilized in labeling information to another level. Because it's reaching a point where individual patient data needs to be part of the labeling content, and that means that there's a complexity associated with how that data is acquired, how it's stored, how it's deployed. But it's not just about the personal data itself, but very critically the appropriate protection of that data, and that's probably maybe more top of mind, i.e. the protection of it and the adherence to data privacy laws, than even the collection, assembly, and management of the information itself. So it's pretty hard to imagine that disparate, fragmented solutions are going to be competent and inspire the confidence in leaders in medical device organizations when it comes to managing these sorts of information. Because now we're at a whole new level in terms of potential risk, we're at a whole new level in terms of provenance, we're at a whole new level in terms of privacy, we're at a whole new level in terms of application to specific individual medical devices. And standardized, integrated solutions make a lot of sense in order to be able to ensure that predictability and harmonization. So those are a few thoughts around some of the external factors and so on. What about some of the internal factors? Clearly, I think we all live in worlds where fragmented IT environments or fragmented IT solutions are inhibitors at times. And we know that CIOs and their counterparts and so on are tasked often with streamlining, with optimizing investments, with ensuring that some of the fragmented IT solutions and so on integrate better than they ever have done before. And I think from a labeling perspective, given how joined up labeling is with GXP and compliance to good manufacturing process, it's pretty clear that our conversations with the industry tell us that there's a big drive for simplification, there's a big drive for standardization, and there's a big drive for managing those environments more simply yet. Another thing I think about is agile, and I don't just think of agile from the perspective of software development, and that in this day and age it's proven it can be a very effective way of approaching that endeavor. But also today, I think agility, adaptability, they're almost bywords for corporate growth drivers or necessities. And so the concept of agile in organizations and that ability to be responsive, to be adaptive and so on goes way beyond software engineering and the agile mindset there. I think COVID-19's even shown us more than anything else that it's critical to be able to be responsive. Again, whilst the agility is critical, you'll find that most organizations that can be agile and demonstrate that agility have their processes and their tools and their technology founded in very solid foundations. And so rather than seeing the global labeling solution as a sort of IT behemoth because it's big and global, you've got to think of it as a business enabler. And by having that platform of competence, platform of capability in place, it sets the stage for being able to respond and be able to be adaptive in reaction to different external events.
I would add to that in terms of corporate agility, I think you mentioned COVID. I think the pandemic over the last 18 months has seen organisations be pushed to virtualise, if you like, to minimise business impact from local lockdowns and to try and virtualise the way that they operate, the way their workers operate, and where their workers work from. So I think that underpins that point of corporate agility.
And a couple more thoughts. The first one is that, clearly organisations are going through very big system upgrades. An example would be SAP's S4HANA, but it's not the only ERP in town. But it is evident in this industry that it's fairly widely used. And I think what it provides is an opportunity when other business systems are being considered for upgrade, for new adoption, that the GLS can be considered alongside. And frankly, I think that if you don't think about some of these allied business systems moving along, at a similar pace together, you're probably under-delivering, or it's probably under-delivering for you in terms of the opportunity possible. And clearly, quite a number of organisations can't do all these things in parallel, or can't do everything in parallel, but at least thinking about a strategy of bringing business systems up to scratch, within reasonable time frames of each other, and thinking of it holistically, is an important driver for GLS. And the last one, and then we'll start to talk a little bit about functionality, is really the whole kind of concept of shared service and operational benefit through leveraging centralized models has been the heart of many operating models for quite some years. And many organizations, I'm sure people on the call are part of organizations where there are really quite sophisticated shared services models in place. I think when it comes to the specialized nature of medical device labeling, we might think of it more as what is the value of a center of excellence, and what is the value of being able to leverage those centers of excellence through an organization. So a center of excellence might be in label design, a center of excellence might be in regulatory intelligence, a center of excellence might be in some allied field. Without the ability to deploy and extend and leverage that capability through the systems in place, and in this case, with a global labeling solution, companies will miss out. They won't be able to leverage, and those centers of excellence, though fabulous in their own right, will be still rather siloed and disconnected from the operational place where they can really deliver some benefit. So, those are some of the drivers. I said we'd talk next a little bit about some of the capabilities. So, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think we just start off, it's probably worth reminding ourselves that medical device labeling is not easy. It is complex. It is more complicated than general production labeling that you might find in other industries. And of course, some of the reasons why it's regulated. So both the design of the labels and the content required on those labels is covered by requirements by regulators. But also, and a key point on that, is the amount of regulated content on each label is really quite considerable. It's not just the production data that's important, of course. It's the warning statements, precautionary statements, the directions for use, the symbology, as you say, are all critical in terms of meeting regulations, because they're all critical to the healthcare professional or patient understanding of how to use the product correctly. And so this does create a challenge. And then the other aspect of it is, of course, you need to follow GMP standards in terms of your label design, your approval, and your production. And where workarounds come in place, especially where you have different approaches to meeting GXP standards across different parts of your supply chain, there's a level of inconsistency there which risks introducing risk to the supply chain or risk of non-compliance. So I think it's very important that complexity is understood. And I think from that point of view, if we look at some of the key capabilities, here are the capabilities that a GLS really should offer and provide a medical device manufacturer. The first is around content management. Now, clearly, a lot of the content we talk about on the label data will reside and come from an ERP, but there's a lot that won't sit in an ERP. You see organisations, medical device manufacturers, who try to manage symbols and other pieces of content within an ERP, bill of materials, and the ERPs are often not designed to do that. It may well be this content sits in other systems. More often than not, we're finding there's a need for a content management capability to be at the heart of a GLS. The labelling application needs to be able to manage component content, be it symbols, be it phrases, words, warning statements. It needs to be able to manage this content in an approved way.
Yeah, we talk quite a bit about this, don't we? And this goes way beyond what people might have thought of as digital asset management systems in this world, which have often been document-based. And in pharmaceutical industry, have been used for electronic trial submissions, same in med device. This is right down at the component level. And every single one of these components, whether it be symbol, whether it be phrase or whatever it might be, needs to be considered separately. And if you don't have that in place, how can you then start to apply some of the rules to be able to deploy the correct content and the right label in the right place? And I know you're going to talk a little bit about rules at some point.
Absolutely. So the next point is production print flexibility. In a modern global supply chain, there's lots of different models of production print needed. It's not always now batch. There's often print on demand, just in time, local country-specific labelling, unattended print labelling. So there's a need to be able to support different production models for different product lines in different regions, and there's a need to be able to mix and match in a very flexible manner. Especially as we talked previously about, the growth of personalised medical devices. These could create challenges on your manufacturing capability and your supply chain capability that you need to be able to respond to. So you need a GLS that can offer that flexibility. But it's not just the production print models, it's also particular printer technologies or printer makes that are prevalent in medical devices. We know a lot of printer manufacturers who specialise in addressing the printing challenges in the medical device industry around, printing on sterilised devices, different technologies such as laser marking, for example. So there's also need for your GLS to be compatible and to support these different printer devices and printer technologies out of the box, really, because you want to be able to respond to demands from the business as needed. Another key area, I think, in terms of platform capabilities is around connectors and APIs. Richard, you talked earlier about different, perhaps legacy applications like PLM or ERP. We definitely see the need for a GLS to be able to connect to different applications using different technologies, be it SOAP, REST, or other ways of passing data in a standardized way. And the GLS should really look to use connectors as a way of evolving within the IT architecture as the IT architecture evolves. And I guess another key part of this is not just having a range of connectors, but also those connectors being built in collaboration with those PLM or ERP vendors, and ideally certify them as well, because this is reducing the risk that you have in your IT architecture, because you'll know that actually these connectors that you're using have been designed, built and tested and certified to work between your labelling platform and your PLM or your ERP, and that really gives peace of mind. And then I think we move on to probably the last one, which is probably considered a bit of a hygiene factor, 21 CFR Part 11 functionality. So, the inherent use of electronic records, electronic signatures is key, because you need to demonstrate compliance to GXP, to GMP in this particular case, and really you want your platform, wherever your labels are being produced, to really provide those electronic signatures and the audit log of what happened. So I think those are the key capabilities you're looking for from a platform. We will now just touch upon some of the business needs that you talked about earlier, Richard, and what they encompass when it comes to functionality that you need to use. I think the first is if you're supplying medical devices to 100, 200 countries around the world, there is a sizable, significant translation challenge of translating the phrases, the regulatory statements that need to be on the labels, where regulators require local language labeling. So often, a GLS needs to offer really good phrase and translation management, control, visibility, and approvals of those translations in order to make sure that the right content is going on the right label for the right destination.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who doesn't admit this is sometimes quite a challenge. And so the capability within the solution to be able to manage this phraseology, these translations, language optimally is a huge benefit. And of course, you couldn't imagine that without this capability, even the acronym GLS is valid. It's fundamental, and of course, it's very connected to the content management capability as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a key part of the content you need to manage. So then the next area is an emerging area. Really, is around the understanding of the labelling regulations for each market, for each product type, and that's a challenge requiring specialists within the medical device manufacturers who understand the in-region demands for the regulatory requirements for each labels. And actually what we're seeing now is a trend to kind of automate those, to encode those within software to be able to automate them. So, it could well be, that you define rules that says labels for this product, for this market, have to have this information on them, these phrases on them, these symbols on them, and not these symbols. And by encoding them within software and using the GLS to guide label designers and label approvers, you're helping to standardize, you're helping to automate, and also you're giving a level of control and auditability around what was designed where, for which label, for which product, for which market. And as we're starting to see this concept of regulatory rules as code, as machine understandable code, to really further automate and streamline this process.
I see this as vitally important to reducing risk and improving the ability to comply. Because what we're doing is we're really handing what may not necessarily be highly complex in every case, but in other cases could be, to a set of processes predefined and approved so that we can predict repeatability in this area and not be human error prone. So, we set it up, we get the rules right, we get this approved, and then we know downstream that we have confidence that the solution will deliver an outcome which is thoroughly predictable, in line with compliance requirements, and not suspect to human intervention at a later date.
Yeah, and as per the quote here, this isn't just a concept in life sciences and medical device. This is regulators around the world are saying, okay, how do we, minimise the human interpretation and standardise the machine understanding of what the regulatory rules are. So a very exciting area, to be honest. I think the next one, which is key, is mass change. Of course, when you look at the increase in M&As and you talk about the increase in branding, then the numbers of mass change events that you as an organisation need to manage is just going to increase. And actually, mass change, the key part of it is maintaining the planning and the visibility and control of your operational change activities. It might be through a PLM system or similar, but the GLS needs to be feeding updates on where that mass change is and how it's being implemented from a labelling perspective. I think, an example very local to ourselves is, Brexit resulting in a need to change medical device labels to take the CE marks off and put on a new UK CA mark. Yeah. In itself, not really a challenge, but when you look at a complex supply chain that may have dozens and dozens of mass change events running over a period of a year, then yeah, it's an important part that the GLS needs to facilitate.
We know from experience that more manually affected mass change is extremely costly. And one of the things we've not really made a headline today is the cost avoidance and the business impact of deploying these solutions. But clearly, we know that the consistency is not only helpful from a compliance perspective, but we also know that the process optimization of the mass change type of functionality in these types of solutions, helps to avert and avoid significant costs that manual processes and disparate processes, I'm afraid, get really bogged down with.
Yeah.
And what that means, and it's not just the cost of manpower and more cost of resources to execute, but what about delays? What does that mean? And so forth. So, no, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, you're quite right. A mass change like adding UKCA mark to a product testing for the UK, if you have a number of different labelling applications across your supply chain, that's a number of different mass change events you need to manage across disparate systems. Next key area is around packaging artwork, packaging materials, artwork creation and design and management. And I think this comes back to your point around the increase in consumers' expectation for fully branded experiences. So, often packaging artwork, packaging materials, the cartons, maybe even the IFUs, are designed by an artwork design team that may be using a different set of applications and tools than the production labelling team. They might be using an Adobe suite of products. And actually, often they may be working in isolation. So label designers might be copying and pasting content onto the packaging artwork in the Adobe tools, which of course is error prone, but also more interestingly, typically the content they're putting onto the packaging artwork or the IFUs is the same content that's going on the labels. It's the same warning statements, the same directions for use, it's the same product information. So actually what you're starting to see now is both packaging artwork and labelling being considered in the same process, in the same view, in the same mass change events. And technology analysts like Gartner and IDC have commented on labelling and packaging artwork technologies now coming together as one. And the reason being, as you manage a mass change event, you want your packaging artwork designers to be accessing the same content in compliant processes, to be putting on your packaging artwork as well as your production labels. So we're seeing those two spaces coming together. So really a true GLS should give your artwork design teams the tools and the processes and the workflows to be able to make updates in a reliable, low-risk way. And then I think we'll move on just briefly. The last one we'll touch upon is print inspection. I think the use of cameras and scanners to take pictures and inspect printed labels for print quality issues is quite well understood. I think we've seen it have a relatively limited deployment within medical device labelling for some reasons, often around the fact ideally it will be fully integrated with your GLS, because what you really want to do is utilise print inspection technology to set print quality standards across your global production capability. So regardless of the production site, the production line, wherever in the world, you want to be able to use print inspection to put in standards in your GLS that errors will be caught and labels will be rejected if they don't reach the necessary level of quality across your global supply chain. So I think that's an area of technology that's got further scope to drive quality and reduce manual overhead and manual risk.
Yeah, I think I'll go as far as to say that I don't think the solution is really complete without it, because at the end of the day, not only is there a regulatory requirement to ensure that what is being printed is what's supposed to have been printed, but there's a patient safety consideration.
Yes.
So thanks, Simon, for just leading us through some of the functionality and some of the key capabilities of the solution. I think just for the last section, what we'd like to do is provide some thinking on how to implement and operate in a world which is very complex, and show you some of the things that we think will make a difference. The first one is the fact is that there's no doubt that I think there's been some challenge in the past. It might have been around skill sets. It could have been around migration of labels from legacy systems, or maybe even the effort to validate, which of course is a critical component of implementation. So we'll address some of those things, because today there are some ways in which we can look at those challenges a bit differently, and we think overcome them much more easily. Before we talk about some of those specifically, though, there's no doubt that we are seeing so much more conversation and so much more adoption of cloud technology underpinning the implementation and deployment of global labeling solutions. And while some people on this call may be parts of organizations who are using their own cloud vendors and maybe not going to a full SaaS business model with their application vendors, we see some of the latter emerging really faster and faster in this space. I would say that typically, in my experience in med device and also in pharmaceuticals, because of regulation, typically, the sector lags behind some other industries in its adoption of some of these deployments. But that's becoming something of the past. It's certainly way in the past in terms of conversation, and it will become something of the past in practical terms. And the reason is that organizations begin to understand that there's a huge removal of overhead in running their own solutions that is the results of as a result of deploying in the cloud, or certainly with a SaaS model. So it does mean that IT departments don't have to maintain particular skill sets. It might be in databases, it might be in security, it might be in network administration, whatever it might be. And it passes to the application vendor, the experts in the field, the responsibility, of course, to be able to deliver to the right standards. But it means that some of those otherwise engaged resources can be targeted on much more value-add type of activities. And I think architecturally, for the IT people on the line, they will understand that, the simplicity that's possible through this. And as we see it, there are also not just software deployment improvements, but also impacts on validation and validation overhead. So the cloud is certainly one of the elements that de-risks the concept of being able to deploy on a global basis.
I'd add to that, where medical device manufacturers do leverage the SaaS offering from an application vendor. Use of SaaS means that the application vendor, the software developer, can actually utilize DevOps tools and principles to better design and develop and test their software specifically for the SaaS environment it's being deployed in, which improves the quality of software, the performance of the software, and it really does bring benefits to the application underpinning the GLS. I guess we'll move on to a couple of other items. The next one you'd mentioned, Richard, was the migration of perhaps not label formats, but label data from an existing legacy application to a new GLS could be seen as a significant challenge. And I think it's fair to say that these days, if you're looking for an application vendor that specialises on life sciences and med device, they'd recognise this challenge. And the labelling application should come with suitable tools and technologies to be able to aid or even automate the move of data from a legacy system to a new system. Because that helps with the migration of the data. It stops it being a long process. But also, there's also tools readily available now that can actually do the comparison and inspection of label formats in a previous legacy system and the label in the new system, the new GLS, because this really is the information needed to aid validation of the new system and validation of any label changes, because of course you need to show to the regulator where labels have changed in the move from an old system to new system. So really there's, application vendors, you should be looking at tools to automate and streamline that process. But also another key thing is a labelling application vendor should have good consultancy and system integrator partnerships with companies that have people who have the experience and the expertise in managing a key line of business application migration of this sort, and the considerations and the phases to take it through to perform the migration safely, with low risk and efficiently. So really it's kind of looking to your application vendor for the tools and the partnerships and the expertise to help streamline migration and also subsequent validation of the labels.
Yeah.
And then probably the next point is also a very interesting one that we've seen a bit of a mindset change in the last couple of years. I think, a few years ago, medical device manufacturers who were looking for a labelling application, or certainly a GLS, may often spend a long time collating all of their requirements in the forms of a URS, and then sharing that URS around potential software developers or software suppliers. And often it would result in often a highly configured or sometimes custom application as a result, which would be great in meeting the needs for that medical device manufacturer at that point in time. But the problem with a highly configured or custom software deployment is it is then often difficult to evolve it over time as the business need changes. And actually, I think that's one of the things that's triggered what we're seeing at the moment is a big shift now in mindset from the industry leaders to put their effort into contributing to product design, to actually having a product-led approach where they work with a labelling application vendor who they know is also collaborating with other medical device manufacturers, their peers, to design better labelling products specifically for the medical device space. And I think one of the benefits there is it's a product-led approach, but also it allows the software to encompass industry best practice into the way the software is designed and configured.
Yeah, I'd agree with seeing that, and I think actually it goes even deeper in a change of mindset sometimes in B2B applications, where what we see much more of today, and I think it's entirely appropriate, is the adoption of product-centric solutions from specialist providers, being seen as a real technology enabler to even surface and certainly catalyze business process optimization. And that's very different from the past. The past was often, I've got a set of processes, let's see if I can get some technology to wrap over the processes and just make it go faster. Nobody ever really got huge amounts of value out of that because it never pushed the boundary far enough. But seeing the mindset change now, that the productization, as we might call it, certainly the adoption of that approach, I think brings much bigger benefits. And it doesn't just bring application benefits, it brings implementation benefits, because it speeds up implementation, because it means that there might be some personalization perhaps to the application, but nothing like the configuration you spoke of. And what that then says is, well, that means value should be accrued faster. And when value is accrued faster, everybody's happier, frankly. And then downstream, that provides a platform for expansion, and the GLS barrier is kind of broken down because of that starting point delivery.
And that's what we're finding. Speaking from PRISYM's perspective, what we're finding is a desire from our customers to take products that we've built in collaboration with other medical device manufacturers, because they know it's proven in a real deployment, and it encapsulates best practice. And often you'll find that medical device manufacturers will look to their application vendors and ask, how are other organizations using this? How have they deployed it? And actually seeking to leverage that kind of insight of best practice. But also the other point you just touched upon there is it may well be that a product-led approach to a labelling application means there's functionality in the product, in the application, that medical device manufacturers may not want to use from day one, but actually they know it's there. And we come back to that point around the business need being forced by the market to change, and the manufacturing and supply chain teams wanting to have the peace of mind that there's capabilities in their GLS that they might not use today, but they know it's there should they need to use it for a particular product line or production site. We'll move on now to the final point on this one, is around automated testing. I think it comes to that point around, we've similarly seen a mindset change from putting an application in, a GLS in, and then not touching it for 5 years. Actually, what we're seeing now is a lot of medical device manufacturers are building into their IT plan that they will do updates to their labelling application every year. So that way they know that they're keeping up with the latest platforms, but also more importantly, they're capitalising on new functionality that's been put into the underlying product. But how do you do that regular update without it creating a challenge for your validation and qualification of the software? Well, a key part of it is around automated testing. Of course, most software development companies are now using automated testing extensively to help support the quality and perform regression testing of new releases. What we're also seeing is a lot of medical device manufacturers who are embracing automated testing technology. And I think what we're seeing now is a desire for medical device manufacturers who are using automated testing to really align and collaborate with the application vendors as well, to be able to share automated testing scripts, to be able to broaden the coverage of testing across the application, its deployment and its use in the manufacturing environment, to really make sure that the quality is there and reduce the risk of issues.
And the ones that are really in the vanguard of this are talking to the regulator.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking to the regulator and thinking about different ways of approaching on a risk base or whatever it might be. And the regulator, whilst it has to do its job, it also wants to progress and wants to facilitate the opportunity for progress. So I think that dialogue that we're seeing some of our friends in the industry engage with seems very sensible. Great, Simon, thanks. I hope that everybody's got a bit of a sense of how we see this, both from a driver's perspective, functional perspective, and an implementation perspective. We did think it might just be worth highlighting a couple of things which might excite you from the perspective of the futures, because future-proofing is an important part of IT, IT strategy. It's an important part of selection. And there are quite a number of different things that we see evolving in the industry, but there are two that we thought we might just raise here. One is around new technology, and the other is around patient engagement and what GLS, what's the interface overlap with GLS. The quote here is kind of interesting. We picked it up from a piece of academic work that's been done around blockchain in healthcare, and there's lots of that, I might say, because blockchain is seen as a very important part of a technology that can be really utilized in this space. And things like serialization and data management and security and so on, of course, some of the things that blockchain could be very good at. But what's also interesting here is this research is working its way into how maybe using blockchain technology to track medical device utilization can link into care pathways for patients. And given that we know that the device industry is sort of selling so much more to an economic buyer today than it ever was, it's kind of fascinating to see how, if we're maybe labeling, marking, different devices using a blockchain technology, which ultimately can, contribute to some longitudinal analysis in the care pathway with the patient outcome being part of the picture. I find that pretty fascinating. And the other piece, just on the right-hand side, is patient engagement and adherence and so on is vital. Cognizant is here in the UK, and we're looking at whether some of the labeling symbology can be utilized to call digital assets which enable engagement with patients in a more precise fashion than ever been done before. And I think if you imagine this concept of utilizing labeling or digital outputs from the GLS to even at the segment level or the personal level, we can imagine where that might ultimately go in terms of engagement. So they're just downstream thoughts and downstream actions, and I know some of you are probably already engaged in looking at these types of things, but it doesn't stop at the sticky label. Well, that ends the remarks we wanted to make. I think there are 2 or 3 minutes, a few more minutes left, and there's an opportunity to ask some questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here. Shall I read them out?
Yeah.
There's one here. I don't know if you want to take this one. How many companies, I guess it means medical device companies, are using the cloud or SaaS for labelling?
Gosh, I'm not sure I can give you a number. What I would say is that what we've seen in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last 12 months, is a much greater adoption of SaaS solutions for labelling solutions than ever before. And I think that the reasons for that we've touched on. I think there's another reason. Smaller organisations with more limited resources can get up and running very fast. And I think, they value that, for sure. So I would say that, that it grows, it continues to grow. And whilst I refer to smaller organisations, what we are beginning to see happen now is larger global companies, top X, med device companies, really engaging on this discussion about a SaaS model, cloud model, because they really see those benefits and they see the architectural deployment benefits for GLS.
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's fair to say they've been hesitant in the past. Another question here. Who sets the rules for label information, which I guess is referring to the rules engines we talked about previously about regulatory compliance. I guess I'll take that one if you like. That's in our particular case of our products, the regulatory rules around label design and label content are designed to be encoded, defined by the medical device labelling and regulatory teams who understand the local market regulatory environment and the implications on their devices for their labels. So in our particular case, it's designed to be very simple to define those rules within our labelling application that then can be applied to any product label being shipped to that market that meets those rules and those criteria. So we do see the label experts themselves and the regulatory experts themselves defining those rules. But as per the quote in the earlier slide, the anticipation is that regulators shift to a way of publicising regulatory requirements in a machine code way that can be understood and interpreted by software automatically. So I think that's where we see the exciting area. I'm conscious of time.
Have we got time for one more or not?
I think we've got one more. Can you expand around automated testing and validation?
That must be yours.
Okay. I think that one's. I think we're working with some of our clients to say, okay, then how do we standardise on automated testing scripts? If our customers are using the same automated testing tools as we, can we share our test scripts so that they can be operated and run in our customer's environment? Also looking at how automated testing can affect IQs and OQs and other areas. So I think it's an area that we're just investigating now. I think there's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, and of course the real driver here is to reduce the effort while still ensuring the quality when you upgrade applications and roll out new functionality. I'm just conscious of time. I think we may be out. Nick, shall we pass back to you?
Sure. Thanks, guys. As Richard and Simon said, that's probably all the time we have left for today. So if you didn't get your question answered at all, I'm sure Richard and Simon will be available in the coming days via email. So that leads me to thank you guys for it. It was a fantastic presentation, and obviously thanks to PRISYM ID for sponsoring the session as well. So to everyone that attended, you should receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can just access it through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. But on my side, we look forward to sharing all of our further webinars with you in this space. So do remember to keep an eye out, and feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, which is at Business Review Webinars. But thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic morning, evening, or afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.